Naomi Prescott was 38 years old when her husband and the woman he had been seeing for 11 months walked into her restaurant on a Thursday evening in October and asked for the best table in the house. They did not know it was her restaurant. Almost no one knew it was her restaurant. That was the way Naomi had always preferred it. The ownership held quietly through a hospitality group structured in her holding company's name, visible in the public record to anyone who looked with professional intent, and invisible to anyone who hadn't thought to look. Her husband had not thought to look. In 8 years of marriage, he had accepted the explanation that she was a senior consultant in the hospitality industry, which was accurate in the way that describing an architect as someone who worked in construction was accurate, technically true, containing the shape of the real answer without its dimensions. The restaurant was called Cerise. It occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in the Gulch neighborhood of Nashville, had been open for 3 years, had received its 5th James Beard nomination in January, and had a wait list of 6 to 8 weeks for a Thursday evening reservation. The woman who had brought her husband there had clearly worked for this reservation. She had planned this evening. She had chosen the best restaurant she could find, which was Naomi's restaurant, and she had brought the man she had been sleeping with for 11 months to a table 12 feet from the kitchen that Naomi had designed, and the dining room that Naomi had furnished, and the wine program that Naomi had approved. Naomi was not in the building when they arrived. She was at her office 3 blocks away, reviewing the quarterly numbers with her operations director, when her general manager, a woman named Claire, who had worked with her for 4 years, and who had the instincts of someone who understood exactly what kind of information rose to the level of a call, called her. Claire said, "Table 7. I think you should come see." Naomi looked at her operations director. She said, "Give me 40 minutes." She stood up. She put on her coat. She walked 3 blocks in the October evening and used the service entrance at the back. She had a plan before she reached the door. She had always been fast with plans. That was the thing her father had identified in her earliest and been most proud of. Not the plans themselves, but the speed of them. The way her mind moved from information to sequence without the pause that most people required. He had been a restaurant man for 40 years in Atlanta, had started as a line cook at 22, opened his first place at 30, built a group of 4 properties over the following 2 decades through the same principles he would eventually pass to her. Understand the building before you open it. Document every decision. Prepare for the moment before the moment has a shape. He had taught her that in hospitality, the distance between what a guest experienced and what actually happened in the building was entirely a matter of preparation. And that preparation happened before the guest arrived, not after. Not when the moment was already in the room, but in the weeks and months before the door opened. She was about to demonstrate everything he had taught her. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The holding company had 4 properties in its portfolio when Naomi bought the Gulch warehouse, 2 boutique hotels in Atlanta, a catering operation in Memphis that ran events for corporate clients, and a rooftop bar in Chattanooga that had been the first property she had ever acquired on her own after her father passed the operational reins of his restaurant group to her at 32, and she had decided to build something of her own alongside what she was stewarding for him. She had bought the warehouse with the understanding that she was going to build something exceptional in it. Not profitable in the ordinary sense, but exceptional in the way that changed the conversation about what a restaurant could be in a mid-sized southern city. She had taken 2 years to build it. She had opened Cerise at 35, 6 months after her wedding to Dominic Prescott. She had met Dominic at a hospitality industry event in Atlanta when she was 30. He worked in hotel brand management, a presentable and knowledgeable man who understood the industry in the commercial, client-facing way that was different from understanding it the way Naomi understood it, which was from the inside of the kitchen and the supply chain and the ownership structure and the decisions that happened before anyone arrived and after everyone left. He had been charming in the way of someone who had spent a career being charming on behalf of brands, which meant fluently and to purpose. And she had found it attractive at 30 in the way that surface competence often was before you had enough experience with it to see the seam between that and depth. Her father had met Dominic twice before the wedding. Both times he had been warmly polite. Both times afterward, he had said very little, which was how he communicated the things that mattered, the things that couldn't be said directly without altering something that wasn't yet ready to be altered. She had thought about his silences in the years since the wedding, and she understood them now with a precision she had not had at the time. Her father had seen something she was not yet ready to see, and he had respected that, and she had loved him for it. He had passed the operational reins of the restaurant group to her at 32, not because he was stepping back, but because he had understood for years that she was the one who would carry the thing forward, and he had wanted to watch her do it while he was still there to see it. She had taken what he gave her and built alongside it, and the Cerise project had been the first thing she had built entirely from her own vision, without his counsel in the room, and it had been the thing she was most proud of, because it was the thing she had been most afraid of and had done anyway. The house they lived in was hers, bought 3 years before the wedding in her name alone, from the proceeds of the first boutique hotel sale that she had used to fund 3 new acquisitions, one of which was the Gulch warehouse. Dominic knew the house was hers in the sense that the deed said her name. He had come to think of it as theirs, in the sense of shared occupancy, and the comfortable assumption that 8 years of sharing a space produced, and that comfortable assumption had begun, in the past 2 years, to surface in conversations she had noted and filed with the same care she brought to any data point in a developing situation. The first time he had suggested adding his name to the deed was in the 6th year. She had said she preferred the current structure for business reasons, which was true. The second time he had suggested it was in the 7th year, and she had given the same answer. The third time, 8 months ago, he had shifted the framing, away from practicality and toward meaning, toward what the deed said about trust, toward whether she believed in the marriage the way he said he did. She had looked at him across the kitchen island she had designed herself, in the house she had bought before he was in it, and she had said, "The deed is a legal document. It says nothing about what I believe." She had not been cold when she said it. She had been precise. Precision was not coldness. It was a different thing, and Dominic had never learned the difference. She had added that conversation to the holding file the following morning. The holding file had been running for 18 months. She had noticed the first signs in the autumn before last, a rearrangement of his schedule that didn't match the pattern she had known for 8 years, a quality of attention that had shifted slightly off-center, the way a calibrated instrument drifts when it is being used for a purpose its calibration wasn't designed for. She had not confronted this immediately, because she was not a person who acted before she had sufficient information, and because the hospitality industry had taught her that the most important thing about any situation was to understand it completely before you responded to it. Because the response was permanent and the understanding was not. She had logged the behavioral observations with dates. She had noted the schedule anomalies, the quality of the phone calls that ended quickly, the particular texture of his attention when she was in the room, present in the physical sense but slightly elsewhere in the way she recognized because she paid attention to where people actually were, which was the most essential skill in hospitality, and, it turned out, in marriage. She had assembled the full understanding over 6 months. She had engaged a private investigator through Simone Ardrey. the attorney who had handled 4 years of her confidential hospitality acquisitions, and who had a quality of discretion that Naomi had tested across multiple confidential transactions and found reliable. The investigator's report had returned in April. It was detailed and organized, and Naomi had read every page of it at her office desk on a Saturday morning with the door closed, and then had sat with it for the rest of the afternoon. The woman's name was Camille. She worked in marketing at a regional hospitality brand. She had been seeing Dominic since the previous December, which meant 11 months by the October evening when she would bring him to Cerise. The report included dates, locations, a documentation of financial patterns including charges on a card Naomi had not previously known about, and a summary that Simone had reviewed for legal relevance and found, she had told Naomi, directly material to the divorce proceedings they were about to prepare. Naomi had read the report on a Saturday. She had sat with it through Sunday. She had called Simone on Monday morning and said, "I am ready to begin." She and Simone had been preparing for 7 months when Claire called. The preparation had 3 components. The first was the divorce filing, which Simone had drafted in May and held ready. The second was the asset documentation, a complete inventory of the holding company's portfolio, with clear provenance establishing each property as premarital or separately acquired. Prepared by Simone in coordination with Robert, who had been structuring Naomi's acquisitions for 6 years and who could account for every dollar's origin and every property in the company's portfolio from the first purchase forward. The third component was the readiness to act at the moment arrived. Naomi had not known the moment would be a Thursday evening in October at her own restaurant. She had been prepared for a moment without a shape, and the shape had arrived, and she was ready for it. She entered through the service door and went directly to Claire's office, which was a small room off the main kitchen corridor, lined with the operational documentation that ran the building, prep schedules, vendor contacts, the wine inventory she reviewed monthly. Claire was at her desk with a tablet. She pulled up the reservation system and turned the screen toward Naomi. The reservation was in Camille's name. It had been made 6 weeks ago, close to the outer edge of the waitlist, which meant she had tried earlier and had waited. They had a bottle of the 2019 Burgundy open at the table, which was a $380 pour, the best Pinot on the list, the choice of someone spending significant money on an evening they intended to be significant. It told Naomi everything about how this evening had been planned and for whom it had been staged. Naomi looked at the screen for a moment. She thought about her father. She thought about preparation and distance, and what happened in the building before anyone arrived. She said, "I'm going to the table." Claire said, "Do you want me to come?" Naomi said, "No. I want you to have our best server bring a complimentary dessert to table 7 in 20 minutes, with a note from the house. No further explanation." Claire said, "And before then?" Naomi said, "Before then, I'll handle it." She walked through the kitchen. The kitchen was at full service, running with the specific controlled intensity of a Thursday evening, the sound of a system working exactly as it was designed to work, the team in their positions, every station producing what it was supposed to produce at the pace and quality the restaurant required. They registered her presence without adjusting their rhythm. She had built them to work without her in the room, and they did. And the fact that they did was its own form of pride. The pride of having built something that functioned when you were not watching it. She walked through the pass and into the dining room. Cerise was at capacity. The room had the quality she had spent 2 years designing into it. Warm without being intimate, confident without being cold. The kind of room that made each guest feel chosen rather than simply admitted. She had spent 8 months on the lighting design, alone. She had walked this room at every hour of the day and evening over the course of the build, and had adjusted and readjusted until the light did what she intended it to do, which was to make every person in it look like the best version of themselves. She had succeeded. She was proud of the room the way she was proud of every working thing she had put her hands into. Table 7 was by the east window, the best position in the room. The table with the city view that her architect had helped her orient toward the streetscape when they were still in the design phase, and that now rewarded every guest who sat there with exactly the Nashville evening that the restaurant deserved. Dominic and Camille were seated across from each other, the bottle between them, the ease of people who were spending money they were pleased with themselves for spending. Naomi walked to the table. She walked the way she always walked through the dining room, without hurry, with full presence, with the ease of a person who belonged in every inch of the space she was moving through, which she did, because she had built the space, and she had decided where every inch of it went, and she had been right about all of it. Dominic looked up. His face performed a sequence she watched without expression, recognition, confusion, recalibration. And then the specific stillness of a man who understood that the situation was not what he had believed it was, and was deciding how to respond to that understanding. Camille looked up. She did not know who Naomi was. She looked at Naomi with the polite attention of a restaurant guest being approached by someone she assumed was staff. Naomi said to Dominic, in a voice that was entirely pleasant and entirely clear, "I'm glad you're enjoying the evening. Cerise has a wonderful team." She paused. "I should introduce myself. I'm the owner." She said it to Camille. Camille's expression moved through several stages. Dominic set down his wine glass. Naomi said, with the same pleasantness, "I hope the Burgundy is everything you expected. It's one of my favorites from the cellar. The sommelier has excellent judgment." She looked at Dominic. "We should talk. I'll send something to the table. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." She said the last part to both of them, with the generosity of a host in her own house. Because she was in her own house, she turned and walked back through the dining room and through the kitchen and into Claire's office, and she sat down, and Claire brought her a glass of water, and Naomi drank it and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Feel the divorce in the morning." She called Simone from the car on the way home. Simone said she would have the filing ready by 9. She asked if Naomi was all right. Naomi said she was. She meant it. She was not all right in the way of someone who was not affected by what she had just experienced, because she had been married for 8 years, and 8 years was real regardless of how it ended. She was all right in the way of a woman who had prepared for this moment over 7 months, and who had, in the last 20 minutes, conducted herself exactly as she had always conducted herself in every room that mattered to her, with complete presence, without losing the thread, on her own terms. She drove home to the house that was hers. In the morning, Simone filed. Dominic was served at his office at 2 in the afternoon. He called 7 times. Naomi routed the calls to Simone and did not accept any of them directly. Dominic retained counsel within the week, a firm with a reputation for aggressive positioning in high-asset divorces. His counsel reviewed the holding company's structure, the asset provenance documentation that Robert had prepared, the premarital ownership records, the deed to the house, and the prenuptial agreement, which Naomi had presented 3 months before the wedding and which Dominic had signed after 4 weeks of independent review. They reviewed all of it. The picture the documents assembled was the picture of a woman who had owned everything she owned before, during, and independently of the marriage, and who had documented that ownership with the thoroughness of someone who had learned from her father that documentation was the foundation, and everything else was decoration. There were no seams to find. His counsel had looked for them, and had found none. Dominic's counsel prepared a settlement proposal in November. It was modest and accurate. It reflected the information contained in the documents with the precision of counsel who understood they were working from a losing position and were doing their professional best within that reality. Naomi reviewed the settlement with Simone and Robert on a Tuesday morning at Robert's office, going through it line by line with the focused attention she brought to every document that had her name on it or would have consequences for the things that did. She accepted 9 of the 12 terms as written and requested revisions to 3. 2 of the revisions were agreed to immediately. The third took 4 days of negotiation and then was also agreed to. The divorce was finalized in January. Cerise received its James Beard Award in May, in a ceremony in Chicago that Naomi attended with Claire and the executive chef and 2 of the senior kitchen team who had been in the building since before opening. They stayed 2 nights. They ate at 3 restaurants she had been meaning to visit for 2 years. They talked about the food and about the Shelby Bottoms project and about what they were going to build next, in the way that people talked when they had finished something and were already looking at the ground ahead of them. Dominic had moved to a rental in East Nashville after vacating the house in February. She had heard this through a professional acquaintance who mentioned it without drama. She noted it. She moved on. Camille had ended things before the divorce was finalized. This she had heard from Claire, who had a gift for knowing the temperature of every room in a 10-block radius without appearing to seek the information. Naomi did not find this surprising. She did not dwell on it. There was a man named Solomon, an architect she had met at a Preservation Society dinner in April, who had said, when she told him Cerise was hers, "Tell me what you saw when you walked into the warehouse the first time." She had told him. She had described the ceiling height, the quality of the industrial light through the east windows before any renovation. The structural columns she had decided immediately to preserve because they were the bones the room had been born with, and she was not in the business of replacing bones. She had described the way she had stood in the center of the empty space for 30 minutes on her first visit, turning slowly, understanding what it wanted to become. He had listened to all of it and said, "You saw the building the way a surgeon sees a patient. Not the surface condition, but the underlying structure and what it needed to be restored to function at its best." She had thought about that for several days. It was the most accurate description of how she worked that anyone had offered her, and it had come from a man she had known for 4 hours. He was deliberate and precise and genuinely interested in the things he was interested in, which was evident in the quality of his attention when he was engaged and the completeness of his disengagement when he was not. He did not perform interest. She found that specific. She had spent 38 years around people who performed interest, and she knew the difference between that and the real thing. She was not in a hurry. She had never built anything worth having in a hurry. She was not going to begin now. On a Saturday morning in October, 1 year to the week from the evening Dominic and Camille had walked into Cerise, Naomi was in the kitchen of the house on Richland Avenue with coffee. The kitchen she had designed herself with the knowledge of someone who had spent her career inside kitchens and who understood what they needed to do well. The morning light came through the east window, the way it came through only in October, low and direct, falling across the kitchen island in the strip of warmth she had oriented the island to receive, because she had seen what October mornings did in that room before she had finished designing it, and had planned for them accordingly. She had a call with Robert at 10 about the Shelby Bottoms project. She had a private dinner at Cerise that evening, 50 guests, a hospitality association she had supported for years, a menu she had designed with the executive chef over 2 weeks of tasting sessions that had been among the most enjoyable work she had done in the past year. She pressed the coffee mug between both palms and looked at the morning. Her father had told her, the distance between what a guest experiences and what actually happens in the building is entirely a matter of preparation. She had prepared. She had always prepared. She had built the room and the company and the life. And none of the building had required anyone else's permission, and none of it could be taken from her. Because she had documented every element and understood exactly what each one was carrying, and had not, since the age of 23 and her father's first lesson, once mistaken the surface for the structure. She was free. She was solvent. She was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.